So a quick recap of the engine that I tested with a blown head gasket last month. After I diagnosed the blown head gasket, I also confirmed the breach with the Liquid Intelligence blown head gasket test. And judging by the bubbles, the breach looks really severe. Honestly, I felt this time 245 may not work, and that made me even more interested to find out if it would. The repair for this breach is a little bit more involved than if you had a smaller breach, but the steps to follow are basically the same, and the repair is normally done after 2 or 3 warm-ups. Just make sure to watch the end of this clip for the most common questions and answers to 245. Step 1, turn the fans off and the heaters to full. The reason for doing this is to allow any coolant that you have in the heater coil to come out of the system as well, to avoid any contamination. And you want the fans turned off so it doesn't cool down the coolant while you're flushing the system and when you're using the solution to repair the head gasket. We will need to disconnect the power fans. If you don't have power fans, you can simply put cardboard in front of the radiator. The engine needs to get hot as quick as possible for the solution to start working. If the engine gets up to normal running temperature slowly, more of the solution will be lost through the breach before the engine is hot enough to start repairing. That may lead to the repair not lasting very long. Righto, so next step we want to do is we want to empty this reservoir. We don't need any coolant contaminating the solution. So we're going to take this off to empty it. This one has 2 10mm bolts on either side that I can take this tank away, empty it out. And we've got a plug on the bottom of this radiator that I can unplug and let the water drain out. Now we need to clean out the coolant every way possible to remove the ethylene glycol out of the system. If there's any glycol still in the cooling system, the product may not work correctly. First, remove the coolant by removing the radiator drain plug. And then removing the radiator cap to allow the flow to happen quickly. If you don't have a radiator drain plug, simply just remove the bottom radiator hose. In many cases there is a stone guard that you need to remove, just plastic clips. This one happens to be missing on this vehicle, so I have easy access to this hose. What's going to happen is the engine's going to get hot, build up pressure in the system and push solution past the radiator cap and into the reservoir. As the engine cools back down, it's going to draw that solution back into the engine. So now we'll put that drain plug back in or reconnect that bottom radiator hose. Now I'll show you on my own car here. This is where the thermostat is. Very easy to access. Remove the housing, take the thermostat out, put it back on. You could just get the hose running through it, flush the system out. Because the thermostat isn't there, the water is going to be constantly flowing. If I want to hurry it up, I can start it so the water pump's working as well, and I'll push that water out like a cyclone. Just, a lot of force behind it, and in 10-15 minutes I've flushed the whole system on this. Not everybody's got access to the thermostat easy as like this. Some of them can be right in where it's just impossible to reach, and others got too much to remove to try and get too easy. If you have to do it the way I'm doing it, then with the thermostat in, then that's what you have to do. If you can remove the thermostat, it does make this job a whole lot quicker. Now if you can't do any of that, then you can also just simply drain the radiator, top it back up, run the car, empty the radiator, and just do that until you don't see any more color on the radiator, until you get the whole system clean. It's important that you do this step. So instead of doing what I'm doing, I know that it can be a long process. If you want to do a head gasket repair, you have to do a proper flush, no matter what type of head gasket repair you use. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you're well aware of the dangers you put yourself in, because you are going to be playing with hot water. So what I'm doing here, I'm just removing that top radiator hose so I can put a pipe in it. And then don't forget to cover up the top of the radiator either, like I did. So I'm putting a plastic bag with an elastic band over it right now, so water can't come out the top of that radiator while I'm putting water into the radiator. And then I'll just keep the hose in there and just keep the system flushing. And because the thermostat's in there, it comes out in stages as the thermostat opens. And I'll just keep doing this until I see clear water coming out. There's no color left in that coolant. So now you've got the system all flushed out and you're ready to start mixing the 245. We're just going to put the whole container of 245 into a clean bucket. And I'm going to use that same container to refill with fresh water twice. So we're mixing 2 parts water, 1 part solution. Then we want to give it a good mix before we start adding it to the radiator. For a small leak, I'll give you an example. If you notice very small bubbles or you're losing coolant from some other way and find yourself topping up the radiator once a month, the solution alone is all you'll need. And for larger breaches, you're going to notice bigger bubbles, and constantly topping up the coolant. If that's the case in your situation, you're going to need the Sealing Aid Liquid Intelligence 243, in addition to the 245 to enhance the sealing ability. Now 243 is recommended to be used on the larger head gasket breaches. And what happens is, as 245 and 243 are fixed together, they will create an unbreakable weld-like bond. And any 243 still moving around in the cooling system will not be a problem, and over time it will slowly dissolve. So there's no dramas there. 243 has also been known to fix a hard-to-reach Welsh plug, my car included, heater core, a leaking thermostat housing, or a leaking water pump. 3 scoops of this, and then I'll put this in with the solution at the same time. Take note to how I'm putting this in. So I'm pouring the solution in with the powder, so it's flushing the powder into the radiator. I'm not just scooping it straight in, so that way it doesn't clog up as you put it into the radiator. You need to just feather it in and just add it into the system slowly. So I've already filled the radiator, and I just wanted to show you here, I've got the radiator hose off, and the reason for that is so I can add the solution to the radiator and not have any bubbles coming back at me through the radiator. So the process of filling it up is a little bit quicker, and as soon as the solution started coming out of either the radiator or the radiator hose is when I put the radiator hose back on, and I'll top up the last bit with leftover solution. And what doesn't go into the radiator right now will go into the radiator later, because obviously the first run there's going to be solution that goes into the pistons and burns out while it closes that breach. Once the breach has been repaired, then all the solution would be into the radiator by that time. So every time the car cools down, I'm going to be adding more solution until all the solution is in there, and then after that just water. For bigger cars with bigger radiators, you would find that all the solution will go in. I didn't realize that the radiator in this car was so small that only 2 litres went in to start off with, but that's okay because it's all going to end up in there anyway. What I'm doing here now, put the radiator cap on so you don't have any solution splashing out, then give the radiator hoses a good squeeze around to move any air. Take the cap off again once you've done that. If you can fit more solution in, put more solution in. Put the cap back on, give the hoses another squeeze, just to make sure you're getting in as much in as possible if you didn't get it all in the first go. So once you're satisfied with you've gotten all the air out, you've gotten as much solution in as possible, then you can go ahead and start the car. If you noticed, the reservoir is not there and the overflow hose clamped off. The reason for this is because I want as much solution and as much pressure on that first run to be in the system still, so it's going to force its way into the breach and repair it 100%. Now there is a danger that follows this. With all that pressure in the system, you don't want to be near the engine while the pressure's there, because if something went wrong, like a radiator hose blowing, trust me, you don't want to be there. Give the engine at least 15 minutes cooling down before you go near the engine. Okay, so now that she's started and the solution's in there, we're going to let it come up to temperature. Now you can see that it's not up to temperature yet. We want it to come up to that first line, and I can monitor this. You can see there now that the running temperature is underneath that line, and it's showing you there that when it's underneath that line there, the car is at 87 degrees. I'm going to let that come up a little bit higher yet. Turn it off, and now I'm going to leave the car alone for about an hour. Come along. I'll put my hand on the head here, not right now, but in an hour's time. If I can touch all this here and it's nice and calm, I'm not really having to move my hand away, then we'll run it again. So we're going to do this about 5 times, so it's going to take the rest of the afternoon, and the weather's not looking promising, unfortunately. After the first run, wait at least 15 minutes, then take the spark plugs out. The reason why I'm doing this is because the valves could be closed on the problem piston and the solution can't get into it properly. So we do this the first time to make sure the solution got into everywhere. I only do this after the first run. I will not be removing the plugs again. I wanted to mention, because I'd forgotten to mention it earlier, the reason why all this is happening in the first place, and it's from lack of attention. So this is the clamp that came off the radiator hose on the bottom. When I came to my friend's car, and I noticed that when we added water, it was dripping from the bottom radiator hose. When I had a closer inspection, This is the clamp that was on there. It's not rusted, so to me that looks like somebody's cut it. And so I don't know, what do you think about that? To me that looks like sabotage. But anyway, so that's one problem. It was losing coolant through the bottom radiator, not quickly, but you know, losing coolant is not a good thing. Now this could have been easily solved had my friend's son had the right knowledge behind him to recognize that he should have checked the radiator to see the fluid level, recognize that the temperature gauge was not right. Even though the temperature gauge on this car reads normal when it is hot, that's a bad guidance as well. So you've really got to maintain your car yourself. You've got to make sure that the fluids are right. It's taken a lot longer this time to get to where it is, but I will bring it up to 95 like the last time, and then I'm going to call it quits, let the car sit overnight, and we'll come back to this tomorrow, and it'll have a good time to rest overnight and really cure, and tomorrow we should be very successful. We're going to do an oil and filter change. Even though it doesn't show a lot of signs of water in the oil, it's still contaminated. So before driving anywhere, we need to make sure we have good oil. So one last time, I'm going to bring this up to temperature and then let it cool down, reconnect everything, and we should be right to go for a drive and everything should be fine. When you're ready. Well, the car's back together. It's running fine. It's not blowing any bubbles, but I have to call it a day because on account of rain, literally, I can't do anything here, but I'm going to be driving the car now. See how she goes over the next couple of days. I drive 15 k's a day, 4 times a day, going backwards and forth. So that's a good run, heating up, cooling down, heating up, cooling down. Over the next few days, I'll do that. We'll do another bubble test and then I'll let the mate have it back. But I'm actually really surprised this worked out because the amount of bubbles that was coming out of that radiator, I thought this was a 50-50, you know, 50% chance it's going to work if it's going to or not. And I'm standing in the rain right now recording this. I'm going to stop and yeah, I'll catch you on the next recording. Well, it's currently day 5 and I have to say I am impressed that I'm just checking the water now this morning before going out anywhere, and it's perfect. So I can't complain about that. I'm going to use the car for probably another day or 2 and then I'll hand the car back. Okay, so we're going to do an update on this car. Hasn't been started for 2 days. I dropped it off to my mate 2 days ago. Beautiful. That's what we want. Now I'll do a bubble test. Okay, there's some water in her. That is fantastic. Can't complain about that. After the breach has been repaired, the car's running fine, you're happy with it, and it's been 10 to 14 days, then you can drain out what you can save and then flush out the rest of the system the best you can before putting the new coolant back in. The solution in the engine is still good and it can be reused if you are able to save it. In this case, I'm going to leave it in the car for about 6 weeks because the breach was pretty big, but you know, you don't have to. We could take it out now and everything would be great. I just want to leave it in there for that period of time. If the repair was done correctly, it should last you a few years. There has been some cases that Peter will tell you about, customers have reported back that it has lasted them 10 years. In my own personal experience, my sister's still driving around after 5 years when I did her head gasket. So if you do the job right, it'll last a long time. If you have any further questions or want to know how to install Liquid Intelligence into your own car, I'll leave a link in the description so you can give them a call. Well, that's pretty much everything from start to finish there. Now we'll get into some questions and answers.
These answers are my own personal answers to the best of my knowledge from what I understand about the product after talking to Peter and using the product. I collected the questions people ask about Liquid Intelligence to put this together. If any of my answers are unclear, I strongly suggest you call Peter and ask directly. What makes Liquid Intelligence 245 long-lasting? 245 is not based on sodium silicate, although it does have some sodium silicate in it. 245 is a combination made of 2 types of high-temperature water-based polymers. These plasticizers and polymers are plasticized together. They are known as long-chain polymers. When they solidify, they turn into a flexible material that will give and take with any movement and not break down. Unlike whereas sodium silicate by itself is a liquid glass that will. When sodium silicate is sandwiched between the block and the head, the aluminium head and the cast iron block are both expanding and contracting at slightly different rates. There is a micro movement happening, and anything that's rigid or glass-like, sodium silicate gets crushed up and eventually forced out. So it's not a very successful product on its own. It can also create all sorts of terrible problems if you use it in conjunction with coolants. Will the solution block the radiator? No, it will not. The combination of heat and pressure needed for the solution to react and seal can only happen where there is a breach in the head gasket. What activates the solution to work? 2,4,5 is a combination of high-temperature water-based polymers. These plasticizers are plasticized together at the breach in the head gasket when the water in the solution is vaporized by the extreme heat and pressure. How long can you keep Liquid Intelligence 2,4,5 in the engine? Liquid Intelligence recommend 10 to 14 days, however it is to my understanding you can leave it in there forever if you really wanted to. Do keep in mind there is no anti-boil or anti-corrosion in this solution, and by leaving the solution in the cooling system is at your own risk. Can you add food coloring to the cooling system when flushing the solution out? I am not 100% sure, but I believe you can. Food coloring is derived primarily from vegetable sources. It has a combination of organic and metallic compounds, called lakes. It should not affect either the solution or coolants. Will 2,4,5 still repair the gasket more than once if the first repair fails, whether it be 1 month or 5 years? Yes, I believe you can. As long as the breach is repairable, you can reuse the solution if or when needed as many times as you like. Will the bubbles appear even with the thermostat closed? Yes, air will find its way out one way or the other. At first, if the cooling system is full of coolant, you will see the coolant getting pushed out, followed by bubbles. As the car warms and the engine expands plus the thermostat opening, you will see more bubbles. What does it mean if it doesn't bubble until the car is revved and when left to stand the coolant in the radiator ends up half empty? There could be a number of reasons. Focusing on if the bubbles are coming from a breach in the head gasket. When the engine is cold, the breach could be closed, and as the engine is revved, the higher pressure is pushing air past the breach, leading to seeing the bubbles only when revving hard. There is many forms of a breach in a head gasket, and if you need advice, I would direct you to calling Peter at Liquid Intelligence. When antifreeze gets hot, doesn't it always start bubbling, and the hotter it gets, the more it bubbles? Or am I not understanding this correctly? Coolant expands as it gets hotter or freezes. That is the behavior of water. If you don't have any air in the system, you should only notice coolant being pushed out as it expands, to the point air is being introduced into the system through the radiator cap. Then you will notice bubbles also. If your antifreeze is bubbling and you notice more bubbles as it gets hotter, I would strongly recommend having it looked at. What about bubbling after doing a coolant flush and refilling with new coolant? Is that normal, or does the same apply? Meaning a bad head gasket? No, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a blown head gasket. Bubbling after a coolant change could mean you have an air pocket or the system was not flushed 100%. If the new coolant doesn't mix with other coolants, you could have a foam buildup in the block. I would recommend using the Liquid Intelligence 246 blown head gasket test kit to know for sure. What if it overflows but not bubbling? At some point, the overflowing coolant will stop from lack of coolant. The overflowing can be for a number of reasons. Coolant expanding as it gets hot, air pockets in the cooling system, foaming in the block from two incompatible coolants, or a breach in the head gasket. I would suggest you do a full coolant flush. Just want to know, could it be the water pump as well? Bubbling in the radiator whilst the vehicle is idling would normally indicate that there is a breach in the head gasket above one of the combustion chambers venting into the cooling system water jacket. The water pump agitating the radiator water does not cause bubbling. Bubbling in the coolant when the vehicle is running at or below its normal operating temperature will always be by combustion hydrogen gases leaking into the cooling system. Does water in the oil, or oil in the water, always mean a blown head gasket? No. Some engine water pumps are driven by the timing chain and not belt driven. I have had a few vans come to me with what they thought was a blown head gasket that ended up just being a bad water pump. Will it fix a breach between two pistons? I don't believe so. Only where there is a breach between the combustion chamber and coolant will it work. If you have a breach between two pistons, you will find there is no compression with the two problem pistons. So therefore I do not believe 245 can repair that kind of breach, but I could be wrong. Can you reuse the solution? Yes, I have also done this. You must keep the saved solution in a dark place. The sun UV can damage the solution. Thanks again for being here. I really hope you enjoyed the questions and answers. Till next time, cheers.